I think about my husband's uncle, Anthony Guerriero, and I think about my husband. It's amazing how they both had the desire to serve their country. The uncle, Anthony Guerriero, we just buried him recently at Arlington National Cemetery. And it brought back a whole lot of emotions and feelings about a young man that gave his life for his country, and then generations coming forward. His nephew, also Anthony, but we called him Butch, Graziano, who grew up in Somerville and, went to school here. We grew up in the 60s, and it was like, President Kennedy asked not what you can do, service to your country and all that. So his friends during that time were being drafted and going into the military, and so he volunteered to go to Vietnam and to go into the Marine Corps. But when before he went to Vietnam, his friends that he joined up with, Bobby Collins, and he was already in Vietnam, and Butch kept requesting to the Marine Corps to be sent there. So his request went unheard. Then I guess finally they decided to accept his request, and he ended up going over to Vietnam, serving his country. He got wounded twice in Vietnam, and his last injury was one that sent him home.
When I was in Vietnam, I would write letters to Butch stating, "You do not want to come here." And Butch was requesting every month to come to Vietnam. He had a job in North Carolina, as I said earlier, but he bothered the hierarchy in the Marine Corps so much that they ended up sending him to Vietnam. When I think of Butch, the first thing that comes into my mind is loyalty. Someone that, even as a young guy, you could see it in Butch. He was compassionate, he was understanding, and he had a loyalty about him. If you were his friend, there isn't anything he wouldn't do for you. Over the years, with all the pain that Butch Graziano went through, he always put other people first. He helped so many people, so many disabled veterans throughout his short lifetime. It is totally amazing.
Even though he had a lot of pain in his life, he also had a lot of joy. His capacity for joy was also great too. And he was of service to anyone who needed anything. He worked for the VA, was the chief of prosthetics at the time of his death. He managed a wheelchair basketball team called the Boston team, which had paralyzed veterans on the team. I think he was the only one that wasn't paralyzed. And he had a great deal of fun working with that. He also skied. He rode a little motorbike, which I wasn't happy about. Yeah, he just, people would call the house with problems, knowing that he worked for the VA. They'd come to the house, they'd spend time talking to them. He had a lot of friends that went to Vietnam and had a lot of sad things or things that they needed to deal with that they could only talk to him about. And I think they found a great deal of comfort from him. I think he was able to let them know that, things were going to be okay. And sometimes in war situations, bad things happen.
Go.
I feel Butch's greatest legacy is that he always put everyone first. And even at the time of his death, he thought of my son and I just before he passed on. I guess when I think about my relationship with Butch, where we were young kids, he was my first boyfriend. We ended up getting married, and I think my relationship with him was one that was truly close, and he was my best friend, and he always thought of me before anything else, and he just was a wonderful human being.
I think his greatest legacy is the kind of person he was. He had a huge heart. He loved people. He loved his family. He was happy serving not only his country, but people. Having worked at the veterans, he was always helping other people and always there for anyone who needed it.
The highest esteem that I put him in, or I could say about him, is number one, he was a husband. Number two, he was a dad. And last but not least, helped hundreds upon hundreds of people.
When I think of service, I think of all of our family being involved in service. My uncle, my cousin, my dad, all of my other uncles were all in service. Army, Marine, Merchant Marine, Navy. They all served, and they served proudly. They were happy to do it for this country and be part of being a veteran.